Hello and welcome to Scott Rock.
We're your hosts from Climb Scotland, Robert Mackenzie
and me, Calum McBain, catch up with climbers every 2 weeks who have different epic tales to tell us.
We hope you enjoy the show.
And remember, when you're out climbing, be safe and do your buddy checks. Well, that gap was a bit longer than we thought. Me and Robert were maybe a bit too optimistic that we had enough episodes to last any busy periods. We were wrong. But thanks for bearing with us. We're still here trying to scrabble around the big C word and bring you all some more interviews. On today's show, we've got Kevin Howett. Now, I first met Kev when I started at Climb Scotland 4 years ago, and I'm pretty sure since then, every time we've been in the office or we've worked together, 95% of our chat is about climbing rather than anything to do with work. Despite originating from Northumberland, Kev has been a bit of a staple of the Scottish climbing scene for the best part of 40 years. Probably best known for his pretty strong opinion on climbing ethics, which we touch on a bit in this interview, but with plenty of really great stories from the golden era of Scottish trad climbing. And yeah, if you don't know what glubbing is, then listen on. But yeah, so I suppose you kind of started climbing in Northumberland, didn't you? You're always quite strongly, at least for me, associated with like Scottish climbing, but really you're an invader up here.
I am, yeah.
Not from here, but
I'm a raider.
Yeah, Northumberland raider. So yeah, how did you kind of get into climbing, and then maybe how did you end up in Scotland? Be quite interesting.
Yeah.
Did you have climbing family, or did you?
No, my mum and dad. In fact, I took my mum climbing at Corby's Crag actually to show her what we did, and I was doing it properly with a rope and showing the gear and everything.
Yeah.
And I showed her I fell off so she would see what happened, how safe it was.
You didn't deck out doing this, did you?
No, I didn't. No, so I took a little drop. My mate John Griff, who I started climbing with, he belayed me, and I looked down at my mum and to say, say it's okay, and she'd fainted. I'm not kidding you, she fainted. And after that, she didn't want to know. She's never been interested in my climbing since then. No, but I started with John Griff because he went to Tech College in Ashington in Northumberland and joined the climbing club. So he managed to get hold of a hawser-laid rope, two steel carabiners.
What year was this as well? Was this like 70s?
70s.
Yeah.
1973.
So this was kind of before all the big tech, like, was it 80s proper ropes came in, and then...
Well, yeah, you were starting to get better ropes late 70s. You had proper ropes coming in, as opposed to hawser-laid, but... this was a college, they just had some old kit. The only runner we had was a Moac, a huge great Moac, which was
it's like a nut, isn't it? Like
a massive big nut,
yeah,
on wire. One carabiner, and didn't have harnesses, just had waist belts.
Yeah.
So we went to my local crag in Northumberland was a place called Jack Rock, which overhangs the River Coquet. And we went there and didn't have a guide, didn't have a clue. Wandered down, saw a line that we thought, that looks quite good. And he goes up to a roof, swings onto a buttress, and you could pull through the roof and go up. So I climbed up. John's belaying me around the waist, and I got to this traverse from underneath this big roof. And I fiddled in the Moac, this big Moac, and it was actually quite good. But there was no extension on it. Didn't have any extenders or anything. Didn't have slings. And so I clipped the carabiner and I think, what do I do? How do I do this? I didn't have a clue what I was doing. So untied, so I'm hanging on top of this groove. Untied, put the rope through the carabiner, tied back into the harness, the waist belt. Traversed out, thought, that's quite good. Pulled over the roof, tried to pull up and couldn't because of the rope drag. So I'm trying to pull the rope up and I'm getting more and more pumped on these huge jugs above the roof.
Yeah.
In the end, I just had to untie solo.
Did it have like an opening carabiner and you just didn't know how it worked, or was it like a solid?
It was solid steel carabiner.
Okay.
But I couldn't work. I just didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
It was a screw gate, and I didn't understand it.
Oh right, so you could open it up.
I could have opened it up had I known, but I couldn't work out how to do it. So
that's brilliant.
Honestly, we were stupid, utterly stupid. But you know, and I think after that we just went soloing. Everywhere we went in Northumberland, we went soloing for at least the first couple of years. But how did I start? How did I come up here? Oddly, the reason I came up here was for winter climbing.
Was that with the uni kind of like mountaineering club?
Yeah. Uni club was really active. Exeter Uni, we did lots. And I think actually they were the ones who really got me into adventure climbing. North Devon, you know, the coast climbing in North Devon. It's on culm, it's loose, it's scary.
Exeter's like southwest coast of England, isn't it? Like right at almost at the bottom.
Yeah, it's Devon.
Yeah.
I had total epics to start off with. I nearly died several times, I'm sure. You know, because we had no instruction. You know,
yeah.
Typical university club. You know, here's a kit, go and climb. You know, you don't have a clue. But I don't know. I think it actually helped an awful lot.
Yeah.
Because you learn quick if you don't die. I remember there was one trip. The president was a guy called Dave Temmie, who we still see. We all meet up every year. That year, probably about 3 or 4 years worth of climbing club members from Exeter. We meet up on a regular basis every year. So it's great meeting them again. But Temmie had organised a trip down to the south coast of Devon, to Daddy Hole, and he gave us an idea of where we could go. And he pointed me at this route. I had some kit, some really mediocre bits of kit, stuff, harness this time, some proper extenders and proper carabiners I knew how to use.
So you'd worked out a screw gate worked.
Yeah, I had some stuff. And he pointed me up this thing, this crack in this little overhanging wall. And I just remember getting utterly pumped. And as I pulled over the top, my arms were screaming. I could hardly keep my fingers crimped. They were opening up on every move. And I just fought my way, pulled over onto the ledge. And I lay there sort of panting like hell. And my arms were killing me. And I looked over to tell my mate I was all right. And every runner I placed had fallen out. So that was a very early memory. Yeah, so quite scary. But it was great, you know, we got to do things like... I got really into it, moved to Chudley in Dartmoor, climbed all the routes in the crag at Chudley. And we didn't know what grade we were climbing because the grades were like stupidly easy. Well, stupidly undergraded then.
Was this back when VS was kind of the max grade? And really gave it
things were being given extreme, like XS.
Okay, so that was before kind of E1, E2,
yeah.
E3, E4.
Oh yeah.
So
this was 1977.
Right. You don't know whether you're getting on an E1 or an E6.
No, I mean, I look at the guidebook now for Chudley, and we were doing E3s. I had no idea.
I suppose that's it's almost like ignorant progression, isn't it? Like, if you don't know how hard it is, then
Yeah.
you're more likely to get on it.
Yeah.
Do you think... I always think this about climbing walls a little bit. I'm sure me and Robert had a big chat in the car that people would climb a lot harder if you just scrubbed the grades off the bottom of all the routes. Because you'd naturally, you'd have a look at it and you'd be like, it looks like I could do that.
Yeah.
And you give it a go. But when you give it a hard grade, like a 7B, or if you're outdoors but it's like an E2, and you climb HVS, you're like, oh no, it's too hard for me.
Yeah.
But maybe you could actually get on it and be totally fine.
Well, I think that's what we did. I mean, basically back then. I mean, there was all sorts of routes that we did. I remember doing a thing called Terrapin at Baggy Point, north coast of Devon. It was only given excess, but we knew it was supposed to be quite hard because the guy who did the first ascent was quite a hard climber. But I saw a guy called Peter Sullivan who was really active down there doing it once. I watched him climb it, and he was banging pegs in. I remember seeing him bang a peg in, and his mate took it out. Took a couple of them, and I thought, I think I can do that. It's a slab. I'm not going to get pumped. And I was quite good on slabs, so I gave it a go, and I got up it. There were no pegs because he took them out. I didn't realise so much. Another one of these stupid thinking things. I didn't realise the pegs had gone completely, and I should have carried the pegs. So I mean, like Terrapin now, I think gets E3, 5C, 5B.
Did the pegs go back in, or did you?
No, I don't think the pegs are there.
Oh.
So I mean, it felt pretty gooey, but I did it.
Do you think? I suppose in the same idea in that not knowing the grades. Do you think having worse gear kind of makes you a better climber in the long run? Because I was thinking back to you talking about putting that Moac in, where if that's all you've got, you probably get pretty used to just running it out, and when you're really, 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 really scared, that's when you put a nut in.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas maybe nowadays, when you have like a full rack of cams and every size of nut, an offset nut, and basically whatever crack is in front of you, you'll probably be able to find something that fits.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty certain climbing with minimal gear back then, not knowing the grade of routes, just having a go, meant that I learned very quickly my own abilities.
Yeah.
I knew where my limits were. I'd been pushing my limits. I'd been possibly going over it on occasion, but got away with it. So I learned quite quickly over the first couple of years climbing, what I was capable of. And I didn't mind running it out above gear at all. I've never had a problem about running it out above protection.
Yeah.
Never. What I find much harder is well protected, brick hard, technical, strenuous routes.
Okay, yeah.
I struggle on them because I'm not strong. So yeah, it certainly helped. But I mean, it wasn't summer climbing that brought me up here initially. It was winter stuff. But I did come up actually. Having said that, I came up with John Griff and we wanted to go to Skye, and I'd already met Dave Cuthbertson, Cubby. He turned up at the university bar with a friend of ours.
Was this in Exeter?
Yeah.
Or? But Cubby's, was he not born and raised in Scotland?
Yeah, he's
How did he end up in a random pub in Exeter?
Because back in the 70s, Cubby was wandering around the whole of the UK, repeating all the hardest routes and not telling anybody, really.
Oh, kind of like almost a Dave McLeod of the 70s type
totally.
character.
And we're sitting in the U bar having a beer, and our friend Paul turns up with Cubby. Introduces us and everyone, and we'd never really heard of Cubby. And we got chatting and said, "Oh, what have you done?" And he went, "Oh, I've just been, going around. I've just been going around all the southwest to check out some of the routes." And he'd been to the Peak District, and he climbed all the hardest E5s in the Peak at the time, absolutely, storming them, making them easy. And in Devon he did a route called Zuma, the Bigorette, and it had a real reputation. I think it was done originally by Pat Littlejohn. It was given E4 now, I think, maybe it's E5. But back then it was like, it was the route to do in the southwest there. And I said, "Oh, what have you done?" He said, "Oh, I did Zuma." "Oh, really? You did Zuma?" Yeah, it's all right, it's easy. I suddenly realised, hell, Cubby's good.
It's like the art of downgrading, isn't it? You do it and then you say it's easy.
Yeah. So he basically then said, "You've got to come up to Scotland because it's much better up here." And that was it. I was completely convinced by him. And we came up, met him at Fort William, and he was working in Eversport, and the idea was that we'd maybe go climb with him, but he was busy working, so we were going to head up to Skye, and he talked about all these routes that we should go and do, but anyway, we went to Skye and it rained, and we had a horrible, miserable time with the midges and the rain.
Sounds like quintessential Skye journey, isn't it?
Yeah. So, but I mean, it was the seed had been sown, and then university club were wanting to come up on a regular basis in winter, and we came up and did lots of winter climbing, and then I moved up. And I moved up for the winter.
Yeah.
You know, I came up to go. I wanted to do all the big 5s and 6s on the Ben, and Meggie, and so that was the pull.
So we have Cubby to thank for the Howett in
I'm
Scotland.
afraid so. Yeah, yeah. It was his influence, really.
But that was so. It'd be interesting to chat a bit about, I suppose, your climbing of Cubby, because I think from talking to you in the office, I always think that you, Cubby, and Gary Latter.
I think the true time, the bit you're talking about, you know, in the sort of late 80s, mid to late 80s, was when Cubby and Gary and I were living in a garage, a converted garage.
A bit of a theme about living in kind of like shoddy accommodation and all these stories.
Yeah, we didn't have a lot of money, you know. It was actually, Paul Moores ran an outdoor shop in Tyfirst in Glencoe, and he had clients, because he was a mountain guide, and the clients would stay in this converted garage that he had. So we would stay in the garage. And I got to say though, the competitiveness was to the fore between the three of us.
Yeah, that I think when you talk about that, that's always what kind of strikes me is, it seems like you were all sort of quite good friends at the time, but with this kind of like underlying like fierce rivalry about mainly doing like new routes, I guess, like finding and cleaning sort of new routes.
Yeah. Cubby and Gary had been climbing for a year or two together on and off before I bumped into them and started living with them. But yeah, I mean, Cubby was, I think you could say Cubby, although he was competitive, he was actually really quite less so and much more amenable to allowing you to have a go and you get your sort of piece of the cake. Yeah. I mean, we'd go and try new routes, and if he struggling and would fall off, he'd let me have a go. I wasn't climbing as well as he was, but he let me have a bash at it, and it wasn't an issue if I got up it, and he didn't. Whereas I think Gary really, he said on numerous occasions that he wanted to be the best climber in Scotland.
Yeah.
And he was very competitive. So it did lead to an awful lot of arguments about routes and lines and who should do what route and ethics, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that kind of competition affects people in different ways a little bit. Maybe it helps some people push a little bit harder. But...
Yeah. Oh God, climbing with Cubby certainly pushed my grades. Definitely.
Yeah.
I think when I moved up, I was probably climbing. I kind of stagnated at E3. Scary E4, 5Cs maybe in North Devon. But climbing with Cubby for a year, I was doing E6. So it definitely helped. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was a great time. Like Cubby and I we were talking about it actually just a few weeks ago, and we were looking back on the time in Glen Nevis doing all those routes, and it was nirvana. All this rock everywhere and no routes on it. You know?
I was thinking, do you reckon that was your most productive kind of period of rock climbing? Kind of Glen Nevis?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of output, yeah, we did so many because we were unemployed. We had loads of time. Whenever there was an opportunity to climb, we climbed. Although the weather was pretty horrible at times. I do remember sitting in the Onak chalets one autumn, and we recorded 30 days of continuous heavy rain.
It's a standard July in Fort William, isn't it?
We were going stir crazy. Cubby started painting. Couldn't think of what else we could do.
You know, it gets desperate when climbers have to find hobbies like painting.
Aye.
So if that was like your most productive period, like, is there any routes in particular you're most proud of that kind of came out of that?
Yeah, a couple, I guess. In the Glen Nevis, I did the first free route on Steel Hut Crag. Called it Lame Beaver. It was slightly flawed. I mean, there's no doubt about it because I rested on it. But I was trying it ground up. I was taking falls. It was E6. I thought E7 actually, but I think it's settled at E6. I'm not sure. And I was really pushing my standard, and it was hard for me. It was pumpy, steep, and it was scary as well because you climbed up this slightly overhanging wall, pulled through a roof a little bit, and got this really weird little nut in. And I could only get this a hex number 1, I think it was, on tape, and I didn't realise, but when you're falling off, because you then underclimbed the roof rightwards, and when you're falling off, you were making the tape sling on the one runner rub up pretty roughly on this rock, and it was cutting through. So when I finally did the moves, got out right, I climbed up into the crack, and I was in the finishing crack, and I knew it was easy.
Yeah.
It was probably 5B at the top. I'd done all the hard stuff. Got a runner ring. I was pretty pumped. I did not want to fall off again, and I fell off, but I fell off onto the runner, not the one down the bottom.
Yeah.
And I just got straight back on, and then climbed to the top. And then when I abbed over to collect the gear, it had cut through. The one that down the bottom. So one side had cut through completely. Yeah. And the other one was frayed so much. If I'd taken another big swing, I think it would have snapped. And that kind of what was like, oh geez, that was close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that actually, so another question I was going to ask you related to that was, is there any routes where you feel like you cross the line between risk and reward? Like where maybe like the outcome of doing the route wasn't worth how dangerous it was. 'Cause it sounds like maybe that was like an unintentional one, I guess.
Yeah, unintentional, yeah.
You didn't actually know you didn't know you'd done it.
No, I was oblivious to it at the time.
But is there any, like, I suppose, not intentional, but routes where you got on and ended up being...
Yeah, 2 I can think of.
Right, let's hear it. I want to hear them.
Okay, first one, I went up to do the second ascent. I thought second ascent of a big E5, E6 on the Ben, next to Titan's Wall.
Agrippa? No.
Agrippa, yeah.
Is that Agrippa? Yeah.
Didn't know a lot about it. The description was a bit terse, but I knew Pete Willens had done it, and he found it hard. So if Pete Willens found it hard, it's going to be hard. So I did the first pitch. I was climbing with Alan Moist, so I got to climb all pitches. So I did the first pitch, was easy, and then went up, and you go up to this block, get a sling round the block, really, really poor, it's not that great, and then you pull up into this bulging wall, and then you swing round left up round the arete and go up a little groove. And it mentioned a runner. I could not get the runner in. I just wasn't tall enough. I couldn't get the height to put it in. So I stacked wires together.
Oh yeah.
Linked them
Classic
together.
trick.
Trying to get this runner in. I couldn't get it. And I thought, well, I'm sure I'm on the hard bit, and if I go around the corner, it'll all be over. So I'd just go around the corner. So I swung round the arete, pulled into this base of this little leaning groove. That's where the crux is.
Oh no. Without the wire.
Without the wire, which if you get the wire in, you're it's round the corner, but you're level with it.
Yeah.
When you're doing the hard moves. I couldn't get anything in this little groove. So I did the moves up the groove, which was 6B. My last runner was way down next to the belay on that block. I would have gone for miles. Really would have gone a long way. I pulled onto the ledge, and I was sick. I was physically sick. I retched on the ledge. I was so frightened.
Do you think, I suppose it goes 2 ways, do you think that made you climb better or worse, knowing that, I suppose it's almost, if not a death fall, like a pretty serious fall? Or do you think in that case, it was maybe just luck you got to the top? Or was it kind of laser-like focus of not wanting to fall off that got you there?
When I did the moves, I didn't feel frightened. So I must have zoned in. I must have gone into that sort of kind of thing you have in your mind where everything switches off and you just have to climb the moves.
Yeah.
And I did that, but when I popped out the top, perhaps it was the adrenaline.
Yeah.
Came surging through and made me feel sick.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the other example is perhaps a little more like it because that was Chiaroscuro in Glen Nevis, which came a couple of years later. I cleaned it off, abseiled over and cleaned it, checked the line out, and then I didn't get back to climb it for about, I don't know, eight months. But I knew it'd be clean, so I just went straight to the bottom with Andy Nelson, believe me, and had a go at it. And I got up the bottom wall, which I remember thinking at the time would be the crux, and it was desperately hard for me. It was steep and fingery and finger little cracks, but gear in it. But I didn't really realise that the upper section was so necky. So I got really high up near the top, about 90 foot up. I got a tiny little wire, RP2, slightly in a horizontal crack, sticking out horizontally around the arete. Pulled over, trying to slap over the top onto these little rounded ripples to make the final moves, and popped off because they were dirty. That runner held. Every single other runner just popped out. Down to the halfway mark. So if that had pulled, I would have hit the deck. Without no doubt. Definitely hit the deck. So I came down, had a bit of a shake. I didn't really want to do it, but I wanted to do it. You got this overriding impulse that you've got to climb it.
Yeah. So
I went back up, replaced the gear as I climbed back up, clipped the little RP, fell off again. Same thing happened.
Yeah.
But this time I swung in, I slapped in, and I hit the edge of this little overlap with my ribs, rather than trying. I didn't manage to brace myself on my feet.
Yeah.
So really painful. So I lowered to the deck again, pulled the ropes down, had a breather. So that's how we did things back then. If you fell off, you pulled the ropes down, started again. And then I went round the top and nabbed over and realised that the top holes were pretty dirty, so I just brushed them all off. Came back round and then did it. And then when Andy followed, that little RP that had held me had fallen out by the time he got to it. So, I mean, it lay unrepeated for a long time. Dave McLeod finally did it at C7. But that's probably one of my hardest routes and probably one of the most scary.
Yeah.
I was frightened. I was definitely frightened on the first two attempts on it. But when I actually did it, I definitely went into the zone. So I kind of knew that the holes at the top were clean. I had a pretty good chance of doing it, and I just zoned. And I don't actually remember doing the moves at the top. I just found myself at the top.
Yeah.
Everything went quiet. I remember that, actually. It was quite weird. Everything went quiet. And then when I got to the top and I sat down, everything started up. I could hear the bird song and the river down below. And
maybe everything in everyone and every bee in Glen Nevis was just kind of like collectively holding his breath.
Yeah.
For a Kevin Howett about to plummet down there.
Yeah, out to deck it. Yeah. So, but I definitely think going in, I've talked to other people about it. Mark McGowan's had moments when he's been in the zone, and McGeek's had them as well, I think. And, they're very rare when you just get to that point where if you make a mistake, you've had it. But you're in the zone and your body seems to do it.
Yeah.
Technically.
It's kind of what everyone tries to get into, isn't it? It's like the flow state is what sometimes maybe it gets called by its proper name. Yeah. But if it's too hard, it needs to be like that perfect level of difficulty, doesn't it? Yeah. It can't be so hard that you're terrified, but it can't be so easy that you can think quite a lot whilst you're climbing. Yeah. So you have to find this perfect kind of middle ground.
Yeah. I mean, I was climbing well. I've done lots of E6s in Wales and in Scotland. I knew I had a pretty good idea I could do it. I felt I was capable. It was just getting my head around it.
Do you think part of it was like that? The push to want to do it was that kind of competitiveness with like, not necessarily Gary Latter and Cubby, but just in general of wanting to get like the first ascents of hard new routes.
Yeah. I was obsessed with new routing by then. I'd go and repeat stuff, but I just found them they were okay, they were good fun, but it was a bit like fun, that it had been done by numerous other people.
Yeah.
Although getting a good second ascent was really good.
Yeah.
I was well into that. Like, I think it was 1985, summer 84, 85, can't remember. We went into the Shelter Stone and we did second ascents of some of our routes there. And that was brilliant, I really, really felt good about that. But yeah, doing new routes was something else. And I've become a bit obsessed with new routes since, really. And I've done quite a lot. So that's all I did for it. And then, after that period of climbing with Cubby and Gary, I carried on climbing with other folk who were equally minded, and Graham Little was one, and struck up a really good friendship with Graham. And he had his little black book of all these crags that he knew about.
Is he the guy that worked for like OS Maps or something and had the most enviable job for any climber?
I know, amazing. He toured Scotland, often by helicopter. And he had this list of crags everywhere. I mean, he's still got it. He's still got loads on that list, I'm sure.
Just like Andy Nisbet had the little like book of winter climbing crags, didn't he? That were all hidden.
Yeah. Graham was awesome. I mean, he was into adventure. He was into just going out there and trying stuff, and it was brilliant. We were able to go all over the place. So did tons of new routes, like all the stuff at Kintyre. That was because of Graham. And his motivation, and the Outer Hebrides as well, all the Bishop Isle stuff and Mingley, Paddy. Yeah.
So you're like pretty strongly associated with like what do they call it? Mingley, Barra, not Battersea, Sandry and Pabby.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the development there was kind of by you and a lot of other folk. What kind of drew you to the islands in particular? Like what made them kind of different to new routing on the mainland?
I think it's growing up and doing all my initial climbing on sea cliffs in Devon and Cornwall.
Yeah.
I just love sea cliffs. I love climbing above the sea. Particularly above a big sea running.
Yeah.
When it's all big scary things happening down below. I love it. It just adds to the atmosphere, and it's the atmosphere of the climb that I like more than the actual technical difficulty.
Yeah.
Because I'm not that strong. I never have been. So I can't go off and do these, really hard, pumpy, strenuous, technical routes. That's not my forte. But I like the whole ambience of the thing. So going out the Hebrides was obvious.
Yeah.
And I've been to Lewis before. And I'd done some stuff on the Isle of Lewis. But it was when Graham said, there's a big crag on Mingley, let's go and do it. And that was the start of it. That was... God, when was that? 94. And I've been back every year since.
Has there ever been a year since then you've not been to the islands?
Don't think so. Might have been 1 year I missed.
It's not bad going in, 24 years, 23 years.
There was times when I went out and I stayed there 3 weeks. There was one time I went to Sandry, Pabby and Mingley.
One after the other?
One after the other in a 3 week period. With climbing with different people. So as they went back home, I would stay on one of the islands and get picked up when they were coming back over and we'd go to the next island.
You're like the Hobbit on
the
islands, Hobbit of the islands.
Yeah, tell you, have you ever spent time totally alone with nobody else anywhere near you?
That's how people go crazy though, isn't it? Either...
I was on Sandry and I was climbing with... it was with Graham and Big Gordon. Gordy Lennox, and we had a great time. Did loads of some good new routes. Did the first big new routes on Sandry, the E5s and stuff. Really enjoyed it. They went away, and I stayed on my own. And Tim Rankin was coming out, and I was on my own for 3 days before I was getting picked up, and then we were getting transported down to Pabby. And I was on my own. The weather wasn't very good. I was wandering around wanting to climb, but I was on my own. I still learned some easy stuff, but I don't know. It was quite scary. It's the first time I've ever been utterly alone, with no contact and no possible contact with any other human. I reckon people need to do that every now and then.
Yeah.
They should do it. I'd like to do it again, actually. Now, I would quite happily go back out to Sandry and spend some time on my own there. Definitely. But when the weather's bad, it's not so great.
Yeah. Is that when you start making friends of sheep and drawing faces on beach balls?
Yes, I do think I was talking to myself quite a lot, actually. Having discussions about ethics and things, probably.
You've never been quite the same since that.
No, really not.
Oh.
I guess actually a thing that sums that up is our first visit to Mingley. So when Graham and I went down into Stronandoon on Dunmingley, I had no idea what was down there. So I looked over. It's a 300-foot cliff. And it was a raging sea. It was dreek weather. It wasn't nice and sunny and, conducive to having a good, easy time. We chucked a rope over. I abbed over and then found myself sort of dangling above a KFC cavey type place, and the rope was in the sea being washed around. And so I swung in, took a belay. We reorganised. Graham came down and climbed out again, then reorganised, went down, and we managed to do the first route. The Silky.
Okay, yeah.
So it's E3. So that was great, and then we sat at the top drinking, and it was like, do we want to go down again? Because we've actually only got tomorrow, and then we're going, getting picked up by the boat, and we're going off again. We should go back again. I remember sitting at the top, we were talking about this, weather is not very nice. Do you think we should go down? And we couldn't actually get to the slabs at the bottom on the first time because it was being wave washed. So we chucked the rope over again and had a look over, and the sort of slabs were clear of sea by then. The tide had gone out a wee bit. So we just decided to go back down again. So that's a good example, isn't it? I mean, the whole thing was a little fraught first time round.
Yeah.
But we convinced ourselves it'd be all right to go down and have another go. But we did Voyage of Faith, which is like one of the most sought after routes.
Was that because you went down for a last route as well?
Yeah.
Was that the first ascent of it? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Worth it. I've definitely been in that position before, and it's almost kind of like a game of chicken if you're a climbing partner, where neither of you wants to kind of admit that you're a bit scared and you don't want to go back down.
That's exactly it.
But you both just end up doing it because you're not going to back down.
Yeah. Yeah. There was part way up there, Voyage of Faith, where the massive big beetling roofs above you, it was getting a little bit damp, drizzly, and it's like, oh geez, And we couldn't abseil off because we were abseil into the sea from there.
Yeah.
It was like, oh geez, we're in a sticky situation here. So it was a matter of, But we didn't want to, I certainly wasn't going to own up to Graham that I was a bit nervous about where we were.
Yeah.
Because that would freak him out, which would then freak me out more.
Yeah, yeah.
Be a circular thing. Yeah. Didn't want to do that. But I mean, there was other times like, we went into the big cliff on Berneray. I mean, that's, 700 foot high, that cliff? So we abbed into that, but we got the abseil wrong. So I had a total epic doing the abseil, where I had to do all sorts of shenanigans to it, because it was too short by about, 20 metres, 15 metres. So I had to do all sorts of stuff to manage to get down onto the ledge. The guys came down, we let go of the rope shot out into space a bit. And it was like, right, we're sort of committed. But it was sunny, the weather was lovely.
Yeah.
We had another team with us. We're climbing.
It always helps a bit, doesn't it? If there's someone else close by, you don't feel quite as
definitely.
on edge.
Yeah. I was climbing with Hugh Harris then, and Graham was climbing with Malcolm from Alien Rock. And so we were climbing parallel, a good distance apart, but parallel. So there was a bit of banter going on. You could see each other clearly, and it felt a lot more amenable. But I mean, the route was way harder. I was E5, so we didn't know what was coming. And it didn't help when Malcolm fell off a roof when half the roof fell off with him, which scared it.
Is that on the other route that they were
The route they were doing, yeah. And that happened like, it was, I don't know, 15, 20 feet away over there, came flying off. And I heard this scream and then this massive boulder crashing into the base of the cliff and spraying everywhere and all the smell of cordite, you know, and
sulfury, yeah.
Smell of dead birds everywhere. We wiped out a whole lot of seagulls. And it was like, oh, Jesus. It's quite serious here.
Yeah. Like, you never forget, like, yeah, it's not, if it's a new route in places like Burnley as well, it's like no one has ever touched that rock before.
No.
So yeah, you don't know how well attached it's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. But I was less frightened doing that though.
Yeah.
Than I was in going in those first times doing easier routes with Graham on Dunmingley, because the conditions, the ambience of the whole place was all very forbidding.
Yeah. I'm glad abseil stories are a bit of a common occurrence with you, Kev, because if you remember the first time me and you climbed together, was in Mingley, and I'm sure we'd walked in and we were talking about cairns in the top of the crags at Mingley and how they're all useless and they're not very helpful.
Oh yeah.
And then we got to the top and didn't know where to ab down, and we found a cairn and thought, oh, that must be it. And I think we just abbed directly down. And this is my first ab in Mingley as well, and everyone remembers their first abseil in the islands because about 5 billion rope protectors and a 150 metre abseil into the abyss, set up by Kevin Howett originally on one nut and nothing else, which had to be backed up.
Yeah, I don't know why people are so sort of concerned with that, because I'm always, if you get one good nut in, why do you need another one?
It is true, isn't it? You don't really need more than one, but it's just, when you're leaning back on one nut, if part of your heart doesn't sink, then something's wrong with you. You know
what? When I was at Exeter Uni, I was climbing with a guy called Paul Newman, not the Paul Newman, and he bailed on a route on Chudley. It was an E1 at the time, and he was struggling on it, and he put this crappy little runner in, and he said, "This is really bad, this runner, but I'm not going to lose all the rest of my kit, so I'm going to lower on it. Just be really careful." I said, "Well, just back it up." He went, Nah, I'm not losing more kit. My life isn't worth more than one runner."
That like epitomises the stinginess of climbers when like a £10 nut is worth more than like broken legs.
Yeah.
Legs will heal. I'll never get £10 back again.
Never get £10 back again, no. Yeah. Anyway, you didn't die, did you?
I didn't die. No, we ended up, we abbed down into the wrong bit. And we did a new route. Or we did, we did like 2 new pitches into... Yeah. It was a different start to an existing route, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that was good, too.
Yeah, that ended up quite well for
yeah,
abbing down into the wrong place.
Yeah. Well, I've done that a lot, though. I mean, if you're exploring on sea cliffs, you can't see into them. You're going to go in the wrong place sometimes. I think that's why I like it, actually. The total commitment to it is really good. I was on Lundy years ago, climbing with Hugh Harris again. And, I was climbing with a friend from the Exeter Uni Club. And we abseiled into this. It was a route that had been climbed before, it had been described. It was given this really weird grade, which we'd never come across at the time, which was E35A. So technically quite easy, but...
Is there someone that like shoots an air rifle at you when you climb or something? Or...
Well, we didn't know what the E3 was for. I mean, it could be that it was sustained.
Yeah.
Was it because it was necky? If it was necky, it didn't matter, because we could climb 5A, no trouble. So we thought we'd go in and have a look at it anyway, because it looked good. You could see it from the other side. So we added into this thing, and my mate belayed on these big sea wash boulders. And I got into this and started going up this groove and things. And I realised it was because it was horrendously loose and unprotected.
Like the cliff is falling down sort of scale, rather than...
It's like really, really loose. It was just gravel overhanging gravel. I can't remember the name of it now.
Probably doesn't exist anymore, so.
No, it might have fallen down. Something like the Purple People Eater, like it was called.
Pretty apt name.
Yeah, something like that anyway. Or it might have been Half Man, Half Hobnob, which I thought was a fantastic name. Anyway, so I'm trying to get up this thing when the waves, because it's in the Bristol Channel, so the tide comes in really fast. It's quite big, and the waves were coming in. It was, my mate was Jeremy, and the waves were coming up out of these boulders, because they were massive boulders, the size of cars, and the water would be coming up from underneath. And I looked down and I'm trying to fiddle in gear. I'm pulling off bits of rock and looking down at Jeremy, and the water came out from underneath him and went up to his chest and then went down again, and he started shouting, get up, move on. Oh Jesus. So I'm trying to climb up a bit faster, and then I heard him scream, and I looked down, and this sort of water just came from up underneath him. Came up, as it reached his head, a wave came over the top of his head. He got completely glubbed.
So I was just about to ask you, was this also where glubbing came from?
Yes, yeah, the glubbing came from that period.
So what is the definition of glubbing then? To be glubbed.
To be glubbed.
Yeah.
The idea is to sort of experience the sea and the power of the sea. So there's a grading system of glubbing, G1 to G4, I think it was.
Okay.
G4 was the highest. G1 was where, and this was a badge of honour to see who could get a G4 or a G3. So you just get sprayed by a big wave. It comes in and gives you a good spraying.
Yeah.
But there's no bulk of water in it.
Okay.
So that's a G1. G2 is where the bulk of water comes in and sort of lands on top of you, and you're sort of covered in water.
But you're not like weightless in the ocean?
No.
Okay.
G3 is where it comes in and it completely goes above your head and you're completely underwater. And then it goes out. And then G4, I can't remember who made this up. It might have been Mick Fowler.
Is G4 like you die? Or you get
G4,
swept to sea?
You get swept out to sea and die.
Has anyone achieved a G4?
I don't know.
Did you manage to get a G3?
Oh yeah, several occasions. Actually, funny enough, the worst one, the G3 bad one we had was at Swanage.
No, is that not meant to be quite like a safe-ish sea cliff?
Yeah, meant to be. Yeah, it was at Guillemot Ledges, I think they're called. And I was with Paul Newman again, another member of the Exeter Uni Club, and he was traversing along the base trying to find a new route. And he saw this lovely route up to a roof. So we beelayed underneath it. I put a runner in. Paul went up and he was coming through the roof at the top. Glorious sunny day. When I'm looking out at sea, I'm thinking, that's a bit odd. There's waves sort of going up and down a bit higher. And then it came in and splashed my feet. Semi-G1, getting a club. And then the next one went higher than the horizon, came in and splashed right across me. And I went, yeah, G2. And then I looked back out again a few seconds later. And then this big thing started coming in. So I put in a couple of runners more.
Incoming G4.
Yeah, it looked like it was going to be really gnarly. And I'm shouting at Paul, Paul, look. And so I just remember looking out to sea and just seeing this black mass come right over my head. And I was just sort of swirled around and bashed against the rocks and completely, it was like being in a washing machine. And then it went out, the water went away and it sucked down and I couldn't breathe. It almost seemed like there was no air.
Yeah.
So I'm going, like this, trying to breathe. And I was freezing cold because it's the sea, North Sea, it's cold. And also I'd noticed that there was a heavy weight on the rope. And luckily I'd held on to it. And then the waves just completely settled. And I looked up and it hit Paul. The wave had actually hit Paul 60 feet above me.
Is that a G5? So, belayer dead and also climber.
It was bloody close. That was the biggest one I've been in, and that was on
Right.
this lovely little nondescript sea cliff in Swanage.
That is the answer we wanted in the podcast. To find out what glubbing is. Where did the word come from? Glub.
I think it's something that was doing the rounds in the southwest.
Just a bit of onomatopoeia. Kind of sounds a bit like what happens when you get hit by a wave.
Glubbed.
Glubbed.
Yeah. I know the guys. I think it was probably some of the guys from Bristol.
Yeah.
Who made it up. I do know there was one lad in Bristol who used to take it to extremes. He used to solo down, it is said, naked with a harness on, and he used to sort of tie himself to the base of a cliff to get glubbed.
It just sounds a bit like, masochistic.
Yeah.
Oh. That's it. We just need to end it there.
Yeah.
I suppose the other thing I was going to ask was, because you talked about ground up was kind of how stuff got done in your day, and I was going to go into the UKC logbooks to get a proper set of data for this question because I'm interested to know. But the UKC logbook was down this morning. Do you think that the standard of ground up trad climbing has went down since like the 80s and 90s? What's your kind of take on that? Because I kind of think that people that are good at ground up trad climbing have pushed it harder than it ever has been pushed before. But in general, there's a lot less people overall trying ground up stuff at a lower grade. So like, you've got Dave McLeod and others who are really pushing the limits of the harder stuff. Maybe harder than was pushed before. But like most average people or people climbing mid-E grades, maybe their level of ground up climbing isn't as high as it was back in the heyday of the 80s. What do you think though?
Interesting then. I don't know. I mean, there's no doubt people pushing the grades at E9, E10, E11 or whatever. They're all doing it head point. Nobody's doing that kind of grade ground up. E7, E8 has been done ground up with a bit of practice by few people, like 2 maybe in Britain.
James McAfee's done.
McAf is probably the main person, yeah. I don't know, there was a post, a Facebook thing, and it got into a discussion just recently actually about all this, about what was good ethics.
Yeah.
And it turned into this whole idea of, have people got better in terms of trad, ground up, adventure climbing, or worse? And I was of the impression that there were more people back then doing ground up. Okay, they were falling off on occasion, but then lowering down, pulling the ropes and having another go, which is really hard.
Yeah.
It's a really hard way of getting up a route.
I think it's scary, like it's like you're talking about in the Glen Nevis route. I think once you've fallen off in a scary or bold route, then try to get psyched up to go for it again without knowing what the higher bit is going to be like is pretty scary.
Yeah.
As opposed to head pointing where you know if you get there, like it's going to be easy climbing or there's a runner or something.
Yeah. And on site is different as well. If you've never had a look at it at all, it's even worse. And something like 60% of the routes I've ever done are on site. That includes E6s. So that's near my limit.
Yeah.
E7 is my limit. But yeah, the discussion moved on, and how many people are actually climbing that sort of grade? E7, E8s nowadays, which you'd think they would be doing, ground up or even on site. And basically, very, very few.
Yeah.
Virtually everybody is, when they get to a certain standard, start top rope and head pointing.
Yeah. I think beyond E5, like so E6 and above, it's quite unusual to see people doing it ground up.
See, that's quite sad, because I think in the 80s, I would say most of the people I knew climbing at that sort of grade, even E5 grades, if they were trying E6s, they were doing them ground up or on site. If you don't get that nowadays, that's really sad.
Do you think, is it because, like, I suppose my generation of climbers is more risk averse, or do you think it's just because, like, you reach like a kind of almost like a ceiling of boldness in your generation, and to push it even harder would just be like borderline suicidal for most people. So like trying to ground up an E9 is like every time you do it is a life and death decision.
Yeah.
Whereas E5, like maybe it's not going to be as likely that the climbing will be hard at the same time as the runner is really bad all the time. Like you might get it occasionally, but not on every single route.
I've done E5 5Cs though. You wouldn't want to fall off them.
Yeah.
You know? And okay, 5C might be chicken feed nowadays, but put you 50 foot out on 5C moves from a runner.
Yeah.
You know, it's a different kettle of fish, isn't it? I do think people have become pretty soft.
So yeah, you reckon it's just like the mentality has changed a little bit in people?
Yeah, because head pointing has become like the norm. So head pointing, well, look at it this way, hang dogging and stuff like that and practicing was only the sort of thing that the people at the top pushing grades ever did. But then it became commonplace. Head pointing is only it was only the people pushing the grades like Dave McLeod and others. But then people sort of probably think, well, if they can do it, I can do it at my grade. I can go and do, if I'm climbing E5, I can go and do an E6 by head pointing it. You know, why can't I? Because they're doing it at higher grades at their grade. And, it, you know, you can't argue against that, can you? Ethically. But I think it's bad. I think, you know, you can pick your route, especially if you're just repeating routes that are already recorded. You know, if you want to go and repeat like a necky E6 and you're climbing E6, try and do it on site. I think you should do. I think it's bad if everyone just decides to top rope. Yeah, I think there's quite a few people feel that top of the older guard, my age, and maybe it's a little bit younger than me. Probably despair at the fact that people will resort to top roping first rather than just going and giving it a go.
Do you think, is that almost kind of like, I'm not sure I 100% agree. And I wonder if a lot of that is just born out of like the competitiveness between climbers in those days, where I think because style really mattered back then, because it's almost like a climbing comp where you can't compare someone on-sighting versus red pointing. It's totally different. So top climbers compared themselves by on-sighting routes.
Yeah.
Whereas I suppose nowadays it's more, as long as people aren't actually damaging the rock somehow and they're being respectful in that way, I suppose it doesn't really matter if someone top ropes like an E1 or whatever. I'm going to straight up say as well that when I started climbing, I top roped VSs. I technically head pointed VSs and then led them afterwards. And it's funny looking back at it now because I've climbed harder since. But I think I actually got a lot better at climbing through doing that because it opened up that grade to me and made me realise it was possible.
Yeah, I think, I mean, climbing's whatever you want it to be individually.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to go and top rope a route before they lead it, it's up to them. But they can't, in my mind, they can't turn around and say they've done the route. I think in order to, done the route properly, in order to do the route properly, you've got to on site. That's the best of the ethics.
Yeah.
You walk to the base, you don't have any, or very little information about it. You might have a guidebook description. It doesn't tell you where the holds are. It doesn't tell you where the gear is. It just says follow the line, and you climb it. That's the best. That's the top end of the style and ethics. And then there's a descending order going down from there, getting worse and worse and worse, to completely checking it out, head pointing it, knowing exactly which runner goes exactly where.
Yeah.
Having an abseil rope right next to you as you climb it. So if you get into trouble, you got somebody to help you get
Once
out.
you have a gree preloaded in the abseil rope so you can clip it.
Exactly.
Or clove hitches with runners attached onto them so you can...
Well, you see, there were people in North Wales when I was living there were doing E8 and it looked stunning, really impressive. And then you discover, you look at the photo and you realise the photographer was right next to them taking photographs of them doing the E8. If they got into trouble...
Grab their leg.
They could... No, they probably had stuff, slings on it, ready to clip in if they wanted to.
Yeah, reduces the commitment a bit.
Yeah. You got somebody right next to you and you've got a bailout clause there. It's quite handy. It's a completely different kettle of fish going up there on your own
Yeah.
with nobody around.
It's odd. The kind of the personal ethics conversation comes up quite a lot. And like, I feel I kind of almost sit squarely in the middle where, yeah, I don't mind really how people climb. It doesn't bother me that much. But at the same time, like, I can't put words on it, but there's certain routes that I want to on-site.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I want to do them on-site, but I just know I want to. But then I'll meet in the middle that I really want to on-site Chemin de Fer, for example, which is E5. But then there's other E5s which I don't care about on-siting, or E6s which I don't care about on-siting, and I'd head point them if it would make me more likely to on-site Chemin de Fer.
Alright.
So like maybe head pointing an E6 in a similar style to Chemin de Fer would make Chemin de Fer feel more achievable, so I'm more likely to try on-site it.
Right.
So like, I'll sacrifice some routes I don't care about in order to try on-site other routes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I've got a bit of a weird in the middle view in this.
I've never come across anybody with that idea. That's a strategy you've sorted for yourself to try and help you
on-site things.
On-site certain things that you hold a lot of.
But maybe someone else would want to on-site something that I would head point.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of a personal thing about what routes you kind of want to do.
Well, in many respects, like I said, it doesn't matter. Essentially, people top rope and head point, do whatever. But I think you got to be honest, relatively honest about it. If you're not, if you go around telling people that you climb E6 when actually you only ever done is head point E6, and I think you got to be honest with yourself and say, well, I haven't actually done them in the best of style. I've always said that I think I'm an E5 climber because I could on-site virtually any E5 in the country. I couldn't on-site any E6, but certainly not an E7. I could ground up with, in other words, with falls or whatever.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't call myself an E7 climber. I've got to be honest with myself. I think it's even more important if you're doing new routes or doing second ascents. So if you're going off to do a second ascent of a route, and the first ascent was done by a head point, and then you do it, and it gets into the news on the UKC that it's been repeated by you, and they don't say that you've head pointed it as well. I think that's a bit of a lie.
I suppose it depends if
you got to do it better than the person before you.
If you report, I don't know, I suppose, in that example, if you'd reported it to UKC to kind of big yourself up, I get where you're coming from. Yeah. But if someone maybe just happened to, like say a third person just put it on the news and you didn't actually ask them to, that's maybe a bit different. Yeah. Because maybe if you wanted to head point it, then that's fine. But
I always think that you've got to try and do better than the generation before you. You've got to try and do a better ascent. So, there's lots of routes around Britain, particularly sea cliffs. Gogarth is a good example. There's big arguments going on about that at the minute, which were done originally with pegs.
That's a classic debate, isn't it? Yeah.
And they rust like hell. When they first did them, they had pegs in them. They were great. They were pretty solid. When the pegs go, they're a much different proposition. And we've got loads of crags in Scotland like that, with old pegs in.
Yeah, schist is quite bad for having been pegged when it was originally climbed. Yeah,
exactly. An example I always think of is it's on Mingley again. It's Perfect Monsters. Utterly stunning line, one of the best lines in the country. This amazing, go through a roof, this amazing diagonal groove up this wall, going through massive roofs at the top. It's just stunning. And Graham Little and I both tried that on site. Abby, have a go at it. We failed. Now it was done by Twid, Turner and Gary Latter. They did it over 3 days, I think it was, and they used something like 5 pegs or more. So they put pegs in belays, they put pegs in the roots. The pegs were placed on the lead, not on an abseil, but they didn't do the whole route in one go. So they would ab into their high point each time. So the ethics of that, they got up it. I think I think in my mind, they stole that route. They stole the line from somebody who could do it better. Those pegs will be rotten as hell now. You know, I just think they should have left it. If they couldn't do it without pegging it, and they couldn't do it without doing it on site, they should have left that line to somebody. To 10 years' time. It doesn't matter if it gets done now. If it takes 10 years for someone good enough to go in there and do it, that's fine.
Once, but if there's no guarantee it would ever get done.
Well, you don't know that. There's millions of routes around the world which are necky, scary, hard routes, which back in the 50s and 40s people thought were unclimbable. People get better at what they're doing. Gear gets better.
I think it's interesting as well as maybe as climbers we kind of have an assumption that the rock is our resource and it needs to be climbed, but maybe there's just bits of rock that maybe those never be climbed, and maybe in the way they are, and maybe some people could argue that we shouldn't ever put pegs in them, and if they can't actually be climbed, then we don't have a God-given right to actually climb that bit of rock. Maybe it should just be left for...
I feel we don't have the right to use whatever mechanical means we want to get up rock. I mean, at an ethical point of view, that means I don't really agree with bolting and the bolting up of routes for sport climbs. And I think a lot of people feel that I'm totally anti-sport. But it's like a compromise I've made. I mean, I've done sport climbs, you know. I did them back in the 70s in France and Spain. So I've always climbed sport routes which have had bolts in them. I only ever put one bolt in my life in North Wales. Regretted it. Shouldn't have done it. But I know people wanted to do it. I know there was a massive push to have these sport routes established. That it was a compromise that I saw. Well, okay, we're going to do that. But I didn't want sport climbing development to take away from the adventure element of trad climbing and take away from the potential for amazingly hard, scary, incredible trad routes that might come 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line. Because I see the rock as important as the environmental element of it, you know, bird nesting and all the rest of it, and rare plants. The rock to me is important. And I've placed 2 pegs in my life. They both, well, one fell out of its own accord. I couldn't clip it anyway. Gary Latta had to clip it for me. He put a sling on it for me. The other one was a rope, which I love the name of that.
So it's a realised ultimate reality piton, isn't it?
Yeah, awesome name. I love that name. Typical American. It was just incredible.
OTT.
But I mean, it's you know, it's for A climbing.
Yeah.
It's wafer thin. It's about the size of a postage stamp, with a tiny bit of tat on it. And I placed it on a route, a new route I did in Glencoe. The route's never been repeated. It wouldn't have held anything. It was just purely psychological. I shouldn't have put it in. And another one I did was a route that actually Gary cleaned, and he placed this tiny wee peg in it. And he told me the peg was crap, and it would probably fail if I fell on it. So as I set off up it, I had this feeling that it was going to pull out if I fell on it. Yeah. It was literally that big. And that fell out of its own accord the following winter anyway.
Yeah.
But, you know, I just don't want to put pegs in. I think you've got to draw... For me, putting a peg in a route is admitting defeat. And that's my ethic.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, there's other routes all over Britain where people have got up them because they put pegs in on abseil. They've been minimal. And I thought it was really good that, like Joe Brown era, the guys then had an ethic that they would only put in 1 peg per pitch. And that was when they had very minimal gear. So they wanted to maintain the sort of the adventurous ethic, and they knew that if they had a ton of pegs and just pegged their way up these things, they could get up them. So they have that ethic. I think it's about time we had a similar modern ethic, which basically said, leave the rock as it is, don't put the peg in, leave it for someone else. Stop being greedy.
I suppose we don't really place new pegs very often anymore, though. The issue is more of all these old pegs and what we do with them.
I don't know, I can cite a heck of a lot of climbs in Scotland being done in the last 10 years, which have new routes, which have got pegs in them. You know, it might only be one peg,
Yeah.
2 pegs.
It's interesting, so something that I quite often think about when it comes... Like, the peg argument gets done to death a little bit. It seems like every second day there's an argument on Facebook about...
Yeah, try and stay away from that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a hole. But an interesting thing that I think about is, maybe a bit of a counter-argument to yours is, we get quite precious about pegs and bolts in rock, because that's the kind of medium we climb on. But is it maybe a bit ironic that we all get so caught up about these tiny bits of metal when we think about like the enormous environmental impact we have as climbers that isn't as immediately effective as a peg and a bit of rock, but probably worse. So I'm thinking like all your climbing gear and everything is made out of the impact that has, all the pollution climbers create from driving for 3 hours to go to a crag and coming back.
Yeah.
Like that's not as visible as a peg and a bit of rock, but you could probably argue that it's almost worse in terms of the overall damage to the environment.
Yeah.
So if you can, a bit of a long-winded question, but I mean, how do you kind of reconcile that?
Basically because I think I try and stick to the whole premise of leave no trace. So I know I'm going to travel to the crags, but I will not leave litter behind.
Yeah.
And I see pegs as litter. I'll try and leave the minimal amount of imprint wherever I go. The travel element and the use of the climbing kit. Okay, I could go soloing, which I did do.
I suppose that arguably naked soloing
Yeah.
and walking to the crag
Yeah.
is probably the only person that can make any claims about being ethical in reality.
Yeah, true. But you draw your own more ethics from what's feasible for you. You know, I mean, I haven't travelled around the world on a regular basis to go climbing. I haven't, been out and about. There's years and years, decades go by when I don't travel in a plane. I think if I would like to hope that in the future, if I wanted to go to Australia, for instance, I might get on a boat and do it. Don't know. But yeah, I just try and leave no trace, and just reduce the impact as best I can.